cyclic awakening. Tales from Waaagh 40,000.
Goal of the Waaagh by Ali Clark. The Cracktooth Desert burned. Bullet-ridden wrecks lay strewn as though by Gork's own hand. Wagons and speedsters were upturned on their roofs or tangled together in compacted masses, where roaring orc drivers had slammed headlong into one another. Black smoke belched as their fuel reserves and ammunition stores blazed. Rounds exploded amidst the mangled metal with sharp cracks. Around them, also aflame, dozens of crude oil derricks added their own columns of smoke to the black haze that overshadowed the carnage. Even all those fumes combined couldn't block out the madness in the sky. High above him, Thragrot saw weirdly coloured streamers of energy coiling and writhing where once there had only been the green-grey skies of Grug's world. The Deathskull Nob imagined that he could see leering faces in the squirming lights. Yet this wasn't Gork and Mork looking down upon the lads and enjoying the show. Oh no, this was something Thragrot didn't understand. Something unnatural that he wanted no part of. His train of thought was interrupted by a solid blow to the back of his horned helm. The Nob turned round with a snarl, lips skinning back from his jutting tusks, to see Big Morg scowling at him.
"You's gonna stare at the sky all day, Zogwit, or you's gonna get stuck in with the rest of us,"
grunted Big Morg. Thragrot realised that bullets were whizzing across the battlefield, and that Goff Boss Blackfang's boys must be attacking the Deathskull lines again. Several Death Dreads led the way, their massive armoured limbs clanking and hissing as they hosed wrecks, derricks, and Deathskulls alike with rounds. Around Thragrot, mobs of blue-daubed Deathskull's boys and looted weapons were levelling their bulky guns and letting fly into the approaching enemy warband. Searing green beams of energy leapt out, blowing apart a hulking black battle wagon. Hails of rockets and shots spewed from the death guns of Ratchet's looters, making Goffs dance like loons as their bodies were torn to bits. Even Thragrot's own mob had opened up, howling with glee as their massive combi shooters spewed bullets and fiery blasts in the general direction of the foe. The din was rapidly becoming tremendous.
"How'd I miss all that?"
But Thragrot knew how. Ever since the skies had gone wrong, it had been risky looking at them for too long. Some of the lads had gone completely peculiar after staring skywards. Big Boss Snagrak's warband had a lot more mad boys among its ranks than it had done before, that much was for sure. But it wasn't just mad boys whose numbers were on the rise, Thragrot thought with a shudder. Even as Blackfang's Goffs came howling in between the burning wrecks for yet another attack, so there came a familiar hooting and gibbering from the rear of the Deathskull lines.
"Zog me, the boss has let his weird boys out again," shouted Grasbag Deadeye over the war cries of the charging Goffs and the cacophony of exuberant gunfire being generated by their own lads. Thragrot thumbed his custom shooter Daka switch and then squeezed his extra triggers and sent a trio of fist-sized rockets roaring towards the enemy. He grinned with simple joy as he saw two of the warheads plough into the lead Death Dread, ripping off one of its stubby legs in a spray of oil and sparks. Bellowing tinnily, the Death Dread went over and lay on its face, its enraged pilot releasing muffled roars as he flailed his remaining limbs in fury. Tearing himself away from the sight, Thragrot at last looked back to where a mob of burly minders were herding Big Boss Snagrak's pet weird boys towards the fray. Some burgeoning wit amongst the warband had dubbed this herd of pitiful freaks the Odd Squad, and the name had stuck. Now the Odd Squad
were being shoved towards the front lines, bells and warning clangers jangling from where they hung on collars, shackles, crude cloaks and odd caps. Lurid green witchlights were dancing about the weird boys' heads, leaping between their fingers, whilst glowing emerald ectoplasm bubbled between their lips or wept from their eyes, nostrils and ears.
"Good fight, innit?" shouted Big Morg. "Lots of war! Just hope they don't come too near us,"
said Thragrot, who could already feel a headache building between his eyes and pains shooting like fire through his limbs. Yet closer the weird boys came, and closer still their minders, snatching away the copper staves that allowed the luckless odd boys to earth the Waaagh power seething through them.
"They's gonna burst some brains any minute now," said Grasbag Deadeye.
But what he might have thought about the situation, Thragrot never found out. Just at that moment, a massive Goff chopper seemed to sprout from Gazbag's skull, and the knob keeled over in a spray of gore. Came the howling cry of the Goffs. Black-clad orcs began spilling over the wreck of Nazmog's speeder squadron and crashing into hand-to-hand combat with the Deathskulls. Thragrot felt exhilaration surge through him, dropping his shooter and wrenching the paired choppers from his back as the mass of bellowing greenskins bore down upon him. A revving blade came at his face, but Thragrot blocked it with his chopper blades before kicking its wielder in the gut, then lopping his surprised-looking head with a swift downswing. The next blow came from a huge axe swung by an equally huge Goff Scarboy, but Thragrot was ready and smashed the weapon aside before headbutting his opponent right between the eyes. As that orc reeled back, another Goff raised his slugger at point-blank range and pulled the trigger. Click. Empty.
"Lucky blue paint,"
spat Thragrot before raising his choppers to hack the Goff apart. But before he could land a blow, there came a massed howl. An awful feeling of pressure filled Thragrot's skull, and a sudden flare of green lightning sparked, as though some lunatic had fired orbital lasers into the fight.
"Zog me! The odd squad!"
yelled Thragrot, who had momentarily forgotten the weird boys among the carnage. The next moment there came a mighty boom, and a shockwave of green energy caused blood to burst from Thragrot's nose and hurled him, the surviving Deathskull Nobs, and all their Goff opponents through the air. Wrecked vehicles spun and bounced, crashing end over end away from whatever Weird Boy-related catastrophe had occurred. Thragrot narrowly missed being crushed under the remains of a cartwheeling Goff Death Dread that sailed over his head, its pilot emitting metallic grunts and curses. Then Thragrot hit a protruding lump of metal that arrested his flight hard enough to jar several of his favourite fangs loose. Blinking in bewilderment, disinterested for the moment in the Goff lads who sprawled and smouldered around him, Thragrot looked back towards where the weird boy had apparently exploded. Surely, he thought, he would see nothing but a massive glowing green crater. To his amazement, the Nob instead saw shimmering green figures whirling and moving in the air. His eyes widened in wonder as he saw ethereal green figures clambering onto spaceships made from a million scavenged wrecks. He watched as the figures, surely orcs from their build and all their killy gubbins, flew through space and into the swirling maw of a big swirly thing. At that point, the vision lost Thragrot for a moment, but regained his attention where he saw those same orcs, many, many more than he could count, spilling off their scrap ships and into the biggest fight he'd ever seen. It was incredible. It was inspiring. It was so much more than Thragrot had imagined life could hold. Then, as the vision dissipated, there was Big Boss Snagrak pulling himself up onto the wrecked battle wagon. He clutched Goff Boss Blackfang's severed head in the blades of his power claw and bellowed at the top of his lungs.
"This fight is over. Morg and Gork got bigger work for us than kicking each other's teeth in. This is it, lads. It's time for the war. War, Snagrak!"
A few Deathskulls yelled it at first, then a whole lot more, Then, seeing the way the wind blew, the Goffs joined in too.
Roar, Thragrot! Roar, Thragrot!
Thragrot bellowed along with them, and as he did so, he realized that nothing had ever felt so right in his brief and brutal life than this.
Things are about to get interesting,
he thought.